to another episode of Hindful Rescue, where I nearly kill myself with some sort of explosion device. Yes, you read the title correctly. This is what is known as a bird cannon, or an orchard cannon, or a carbide cannon, and it's insane. Now, let me just begin by stating that this specific tool scares me more than anything else I have restored thus far. Let me remind you that this surpasses the Sally saw. This surpasses the model. This surpasses the drag saw. This thing is, by design, a nightmare. Now, how this works, let me lay this out for you very cleanly here. You take calcium carbide rocks, which, when exposed to water, create acetylene gas. The water is contained in a vessel on top of the rocks that you can control by a little thumb screw the drip rate. More water, more explosion. Less water, less explosion. Now, this acetylene slowly builds up in the internal mechanism, which then makes the thing explode when it strikes a flint. So the entire thing is essentially a set it and forget it tool for farmers, and you would just kind of hope it worked all the time and you walked away. Worst case scenario, you die. Best case, birds aren't eating your apples or your cherries. Where do I find these things? Is your next question. To that I say, how dare you speak to me? Now, every single bolt needed to be flamed up on the frame. This must have been sitting outside, is my guess. It's just incredibly rusty. I'm not sure if the acetylene over time makes it more rusty. I doubt it. I don't really know, but it's just aggressively fighting me every single step of the way. This right here is the exact mechanism that I was previously talking about. It's incredibly complicated, and at this point, I don't know how it works. I do figure that out, but essentially this lower green chamber holds a diaphragm that fills and expands with acetylene, and as that expands, there's that foot pad that sits on top of that diaphragm that starts rising higher and higher. As it gets to a certain height, it flicks open a valve which starts dumping acetylene into the explosion chamber of the cannon, and as it releases the acetylene into there, the foot pad starts lowering because there's no more acetylene gas in the diaphragm, and as it strikes back downwards, it flips very aggressively a flint sparking wheel, which sparks right by the explosion chamber, creating a giant explosion sound, scaring away the neighbors and other small humans. So, in trying to take this whole mechanism apart, I'm trying to figure out how it does this, all mechanically, obviously, no digital sensors or anything. It's just pure mechanics, which is my favorite. highest level of gizmosity occurring within this little mechanism here. And I don't want to damage anything. I don't know if anything's missing either. Maybe it is. I don't know. This was also something that was very difficult to find any documentation for whatsoever. I found one photo of a little front of a manual, but it contained maybe 3 pixels, so it was incredibly useless to me. So I'm very hesitant once again to use this, because what if I'm using it improperly? What if after restoring this mechanism it jams, or I did it improperly and it's stuck, or it releases too much acetylene and the whole thing just explodes in a shrapnel-like death? I don't know. Do you know? Nobody knows. Okay, I'm always the person trying to know what nobody knows. But you gotta know in order to restore. Now, let me introduce more anxiety into your body. That rubber gasket diaphragm thing that I showed previously expands and contracts with a certain force related to the hardness of the rubber, the thickness of the rubber, and the elasticity of the rubber. So if it is too difficult to expand, in the sense that the rubber is too hard that I find a replacement of, then the acetylene pressure would need to be higher and higher in order to lift that foot pad enough to release the acetylene into the chamber. Now, you don't want high pressure with acetylene in any capacity, because it spontaneously combusts just as you're chilling above around 15 psi of pressure. So that's cool. So if I don't get the right rubber type, and by that I mean elasticity and thickness, and it must also be resistant to acetylene at the same time, then we have a high chance of mega death explosion shrapnel situation. So that's not really what I'm into, honestly. I'm not really thinking about that at the moment. And what complicates things even further is that this rubber is potentially the original rubber that was there, meaning that this was from the 1950s. Okay, we're talking 75 years ago, essentially. And that rubber is obviously harder than it was in 1950. So how do I guess the right rubber hardness when the original rubber is currently harder than it probably was? I have a durometer, so something that measures the hardness of rubbers, and I got kind of mixed results depending on where I put that on the rubber. And I'm just going to kind of go with my gut, and I believe I stuck with like a 40A durometer rubber, if that means anything to the rubberologists out there. That seemed to be as close as I could get, but who knows? Who knows? Now, the flint mechanism is going to require some new flints and potentially a new striking wheel, depending on how rusty and deteriorated that wheel is. This is the chamber where you put the water on the top half right there, and the bottom half contains the calcium carbide rocks. Now, this has deteriorated into calcium hydroxide over time. There's nothing you can do about that. It's potential that the moisture in the air converted the remaining calcium carbide that happened to be in there in the last 75 years, or through the natural reaction of water and calcium carbide. One of the products is calcium hydroxide. So it could just be residue, could just be decomposition, I believe is the right word. Now the lovely sounds of the brass micro spigot. This is the knob that doses out the water accordingly. Now, all I could find online is that you could control the rate of explosions from once every minute to once every hour based on your drip rate. That seems excessive. I don't know how long that would last, though. Maybe it lasts a few hours or 24 hours. I don't really know how productive the rocks are. Now, all these rubber gaskets I'll have to find, once again, the proper replacements for. Less critical on the pressures, but important that it's at least acetylene resistant, which most are, but some are better than others. And the right thickness and elasticity. There we go, fully apart, ready for the evaporest. Now, everything's not going to fit in here. Unfortunately, the giant cannon portion will need to be done in the method of wrapping a soaked evaporous cloth right near the surface to prevent any etching lines that occur when metal is exposed in evaporous. It needs to be fully submerged. The final trick to get this apart is to grind off the little name tag that says Made in Holland. And it shouldn't be too hard, it's just literally pinned in, so yay. I'm just checking to make sure there's no calcium carbide residue here, because if I throw this into the evaporust, which is mostly water, it's going to start bubbling and creating acetylene gas, which is not the intended use. A flammable evaporust does tempt me, though. Like one that's truly on fire is incredibly interesting. But regardless, I'm just checking. Apparently, if I mix that with vinegar, it would start bubbling like crazy, but I'm just making sure that I'm not creating explosive gas using my little bucket here. Now, we have another problem. This thing is rusted out. There are numerous holes. Great sadness. Because explosions. Because explosions. Okay. An explosion will only make those worse. So I'll have to fix that. And this was the most difficult paint to get off in a really, really long time. I don't know what in the world was used. It must have been baked on times a million. It was just nuts. And it was lead paint, so I wanted to get as much off as possible before I started sandblasting it all into my face. But I have no idea. I truly have no idea. Even my strongest of strongest paint strippers were having a difficult time. Like multiple applications. And it was such a thin layer of paint, too. We'll never know. Now, of course, sandblasting is going to make the holes a little worse here. By little, I mean a massive amount. I thought for a while about what best to do, and welding is maybe an option, but it's so thin there, it's unnecessarily difficult. And I thought about some exhaust repair epoxies and tapes, but I settled just truly on JB Weld since I've used it for repairing piston wall damage, and it holds up. Like, it just holds up. I don't know how, it just does. So yay for that. And if this does fail, then I'll just die, I guess. This little brassy boy here is actually the valve that lifts up and releases the acetylene into the explosion chamber. And then when it's fully released, it closes shut with a spring and stays nice and airtight so that the diaphragm can fill up again and not leak into the chamber constantly. That's one of my other fears, is that I don't get this valve to seat and seal properly, and the explosion kind of backfires into the entire canister out front that's producing the acetylene. Then I just die. So I just sit in my room facing the wall, pondering if this is worth my life. And clearly it is, very clearly, since I'm posting this video. Look at the beautiful red paint. And then watch how I destroy it, because I have just no foresight whatsoever. So there's a little foot pad, sits on the little diaphragm, very foot paddy. See how it's attached to the main switch, and also has a cylinder attached to it for the flint switch. It's called a double mechanism, I believe, in Belgium. I should say Holland, actually, to be more fitting. Oh. Of course, I must brassify all of the fasteners, which were toast pretty much anyways, very rusty, so I have boxes of these slotted domed brass fasteners and just using them up as much as I can. Now, this only goes on in a very specific way, as I find out. And I find out with great sadness to the paint that it would have been better if I just practiced this, apparently. But I didn't, because I don't have the foresight, apparently. So the scratches are there, and it makes me sad, but I can fix it. It's just paint. The mechanism's more important. And this thing is contained in a little box, as you saw. I don't know why. Maybe so you don't get your finger stuck in it or something. I have no idea. But maybe for weather reasons, let's say. But that didn't really do anything either. It was all rusty inside anyways. So at this point in real time, I actually still don't get how this works. I don't truly understand why things are the way they are. Because I'm human garbage. Now, beautiful, acetylene resistant, fiber reinforced, perfect thickness of 1/8 rubber. This is another gasket that requires perfection in its elasticity and thickness. For if I get this wrong, once again, we blasted. If someone was alive today that used to build one of these in the factory, or the original maker, I'm fairly sure they'd be on the edge of a building about to jump off. I'm not fully confident yet. So here's me like testing out the mechanism. And it doesn't really seem to be moving the brass valve at all. And then now it moves it up and down. So I bent those two little forks on the brass valve closer together. It's possible they moved apart from one another over time and wore out. I don't know, but that seemed to fix everything. So yay, but maybe not yay, and I die. Now, you saw the rubber gasket. This is truly a shot in the dark rubber gasket. Okay, let's just hope. If you're doing this at home, I've already told you what it was. Please follow the guidelines. I'm testing out with air. And it's really cool. Like, it does what I want it to do. At least I think. Like, the valve closes and stops the air when it's down and lets it through when it's open. And the flint striking thing strikes and turns, so it should be okay. But how do you know? Painting the main body was a whole task in itself. It contains 3 colors, of which is red and green and this kind of weird antique cream. And I didn't really enjoy the amount of splatter that spray painting tries to blast to places you don't want it to go. So that actually took, I think, like a week to just paint the main cannon body. It doesn't fit in my oven, so I could rapidly harden the paint. So I'm just waiting for each color to dry for about 2 or 3 days. It just was not the coolest. Now, there used to be cloth in the middle of this hole in the top of the water chamber. And it took me a while to figure out why, but that's because when you move this around, water can get into that center pipe and down into the chamber that holds the calcium carbide. And if that does happen, this thing is going to explode in your car or in your hand or in the back of your truck, wherever you happen to be moving it to and from. And you do not need this, let me tell you, to go off unexpectedly. For you shall die in an acoustic sense. I'm also just slightly re-knurling the brass. Like, if there's brass, I'm touching it, okay? I'm touching it, and I'm doing stuff to it. Consensually, though. It wants me to do it. It actually needs me to do it. Beautiful. There also was a notch cut, like a perfect V cut on one edge of that thumb screw. And I didn't know if that was for a reason or not, and I wasn't going to remove it. You know, like maybe when that lines up with something else that's like a perfect drip rate for 1 hour every explosion or something. I don't know. It just seemed too perfect of a nice notch to be accidental damage. The hooks that help clamp the top of the chamber, which contains water, to the bottom of the chamber, which contains the calcium carbonate, are completely toast. And I just found these hooks at the store, and they were all the wrong thread size, unfortunately, because it just has to be that way every time. And just recut new threads. Easy peasy. Lemon. The little flanges, or I don't even know, little hooks that help this hook onto the frame to stabilize the containers so they don't move around and explode, are also way too pitted and not acceptable for safety reasons. So this is quick and easy to remake. This is nothing. And as per usual, I upped the thickness of these parts. Just because at this point, I'm still very nervous to touch this and use this. Now, here's a question for you. Why does that center pipe even need to exist within the water chamber? It took me a while to figure out, because I figured you just fill the top with water and let it drip out into the bottom chamber. Why do I need a hole through the middle? That seems excessively dangerous. And my guess, along with the guess of a bunch of other people, was that the built up acetylene pressure in the bottom chamber would help push the water down into the bottom chamber if there was that pipe. So the pressure that is built up is shared between both chambers and helps push on the water along with gravity enough that it surpasses the potential vacuum that would be created by just having a sealed water container and having water try to drip out of it. So that extra pressure in there helps push that water at the perfect rate. Is the potential reason. It's kind of odd. You could almost put the acetylene hose bib thing on the top silver dome of the chamber assembly. That would probably work just fine as well, but that's the guess. Now, new flints put in, stolen from a glorious lighter. I am just merely testing if any flint will work, or if I need to go buy this specific size flint or a specific type of flint. Who knows? I've also decided to leave this completely open so everybody can see the highest gizmosity danger item in my shop currently. This little piece here has two holes at the end of it, potentially for more or less of a spark, or maybe there's wear over time it seems like an odd adjustment option. I don't really know. And it also scares me because maybe something's missing. Maybe that's supposed to be attached to something else. How do you know? Now, obviously, I'm assembling this without any water or calcium carbide. And that's on purpose because unfortunately I can't seem to get my hands on any calcium carbide in Canada. I think you can buy it if you are a chemistry teacher or doing some research, but I could not get any in any legal way that I knew of into my hands and for use for this demonstration, which is very sad because I wanted to try it out and I wanted to see it work at its full potential. So my plan is to run it off of propane. Now there are modern ones that are very similar in design that run completely off your standard 20-pound propane tank, and it should work. You know, flame, oxygen, fuel, sparky, we're good. But I really, really want to find some calcium carbide one day and test this out. Although, how do you know when it's done exploding? How do you know the acetylene has fully been created and all the carbide's fully used up? So here's me trying with propane. You can hear it entering the chamber, and you can see the mechanisms working gloriously. But it's just not lighting, and it is sparking. So I don't understand. There's maybe too much fuel or too much oxygen or not enough oxygen and not enough fuel, or the spark's just not getting into the chamber deep enough. I don't really know. It's disappointing, but I just ended up hooking up directly to my welding acetylene tank. And it's working. Kind of. Oh, yes. It blasts. It blasts extremely blasty. I destroyed my neighbors. It's it's too much fun. It's illegal amounts of fun once again. And come on over. I'll make you deaf anytime you want. And that's pretty much it. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Later.